self-service and the platform to support it, and share some of our experience, myself and Trevor, which I'll let him introduce himself later, the experience that we had in delivering self-service analytics to our clients, and some of the challenges that we found, and kind of share some of the stories behind it and some of the practice that could help you get there faster. A little bit about myself. I invested most of my career, 27 years, into delivering, whether it was called BI or analytics, since my first days at Cognos 27 years ago. But in the last few years, I kind of changed a little bit of my motive to see how customers are using it, how they're deploying it, and most importantly, how they're consuming it, and helping clients make sure there's adoption and there's a good strategic deployment, which really brings impact to bring the return on investment. And I found that successful projects for an analytics-driven organization have been based on the foundational elements that you see here on that slide. Self-service, of course, has always been something at the end of the day. Now it's becoming more of a buzzword of the industry, but self-service has always been a request from the business users, whether it's just I want to run a report whenever I want, or I do want to hit the data and be able to drag and drop and build my own views and analyze the data. So self-service is important, but also trust. Trust in the data is a key here. So many BI/analytics deployment are slowly decreasing sometimes as just pure report distribution because users don't trust the data enough to really explore such data. So trusting the data is still a key foundational element and one of the challenges that we see out there. And then smart, meaning that whatever you publish or deploy to the end user should be smart, and it should be really bringing impactful insight to the end user. And finally, engagement. You want to make sure that you don't just overwhelm or send too much information. You want to make sure there's engagement so that the users also have an appetite to come in and explore. So all those four foundational elements we believe are critical to drive adoption across the organization. And I think that applies to anything, any type of apps or any type of information delivery in general. So build it, will they come? The traditional data warehouse. Let's talk about it just a little bit. There's of course, most of the BI projects in the past have been supported by a traditional data mart or data warehouse, or ODS, or whatever they call it. But what we found, and you guys probably know that, more than 50% of the data is rarely used. It has to be there for historical purpose sometime, or auditing, or some specific use case, but at least 50%. I would actually say more than that is rarely used. And on the other hand, there's an increasing need for analytics empowerment. Non-technical users now are starting to say, hey, to do my job, to impact with decisions, I need to be able to explore the data. I don't exactly know what I want, but I need to sometimes just bring the data in, transform it, and analyze it. That's a big, big need, which in the past was more driven by, what we call business analysts, but now things have changed, and we got more than business analysts that require such capability and empowerment. It's okay to be departmental now. It's, and I'll talk about it in a couple of slides, but it still needs to be governed. Remember Excel? Excel was back in the days pretty much the most used analytic or reporting tool out there. However, the challenge was that Excel was siloed, sitting on the desktop, and it became very challenging to make sure we have accurate data across the organization. So the data warehouse just cannot be a one-size-fits-all anymore. We all know that, but how do we leverage the data warehouse and enable self-service and all the modern analytics that some of those vendors are bringing to the table? Speaking of vendors, I like that slide. It gives you an analogy of who sells more, who sells you, or what platform you acquire that is more traditional, which you probably guessed that is on the left side, and then the T-shirt platform on the right side, which brings you agility, very opportunity-based, very departmental-based, thinking that it's going to grow over time and land and expand, and very focused on self-service and data discovery to the desktop. Whether you use a web browser or an actual desktop tool, it's still a focus on the desktop experience. And then on the left side, the traditional BI are more like, okay, what are your requirements? We're going to build you a top-down design, and then you can use to make decisions. So the challenge is to have both, I think, into one single platform if you're looking at standardizing across the organization. And I've seen many large organizations which are not standardizing anymore. They're saying, okay, this is the best tool for the job, this is the best platform for the job, it's okay. But they are now facing more challenges as far as governance is concerned, based on either it's regulations, compliance, or just pure management, be able to manage all those platforms into one. So I'm hopeful that I think this is where it's going. Gartner said that this is where this will lead, and probably sooner than later. So why self-service? What's the demand? Well, the demand has always been there, like I said in my first slide. But bottom line, you want to bridge IT data gaps and give data to the users. You don't want IT to be a data distribution mechanism or just an information, warehouse, basically, and always pushing reports out there. You want data to be available, and you want users to self-serve themselves. There's a lot of new data that is constantly emerging, coming up from all over the place, depending on the industry, and there's no way IT would be able to constantly bring the right data in the right format to the end users. It would be very challenging, and you would need a much bigger data team per se. There's an increasing need for near real-time. I mean, real-time has a lot of meaning when we sit down with the business users. Typically, I like to call it near real-time, but bottom line, what they're looking for is on demand. So they're looking for, hey, I want to get the data as current as possible when I need it, right? Some industry will need some real time, of course, but the norm is more, intraday or on demand. And then there's seasonality. Things happen, and you need to be able to address this with data and information that those triggering events are generating. And finally, the last bullet I think is important. I realize that now the business analyst is slowly becoming the data scientist, and there's some kind of convergence between the two. Of course, if you look at insurance industry, for example, the actuaries, from my perspective, are pretty much some sort of data scientists as well. They bring impact, and they bring data insight. Some of them even predictive, that are really bringing important metrics and impactful insight to the organization. So I think this is, as the data science is becoming much more available. I don't know if you attended last week's webinar from my colleague Chris Engstrom, but it's becoming much more affordable, available. So therefore, the business analysts are now becoming much more inclined towards being data scientists as well. What challenges have we seen? And I'm sure you guys have seen them as well. I mean, the key one is poor performance. There's nothing worse than waiting for data when you're in exploration mode. You don't sit, wait, and explore. You keep exploring. And that's been one of the reasons why the desktop experience has brought a lot more positive impact to self-service, because they kind of, store everything on that desktop memory. So poor performance is one of the biggest challenges we've seen. And with the new technology out there, it's easily addressable. I think, of course, you have to transform your data platform, but poor performance is definitely something you can address. Confusing models. Too many of those metadata layers. I don't want to get technical here, but the business view of your data sometimes is too much identical to the database view, and that confuses the end user. And typically it's because whoever builds that business layer is more of a technical data person, and nothing wrong with that. But without the understanding of what the users want to do with the data, you typically end up with a confusing model. And then inaccurate or misunderstood result, that's more, it's kind of the same issue than the one above. Lack of governance, as this thing grows and you add more and more data, if you don't document and have a way to govern it, it's going to become a monster. And it's going to be hard to navigate through what does that metric really mean, and where is it coming from. And finally, the user experience. I feel that most of the BI and analytics projects fall short at the tail end. I don't know if it's a lack of budget at the end or whatever, but we just don't spend enough time thinking about the user experience. Does it look good? Is it inviting? Is it the way you want to navigate through it? I can tell you that the Apple developers, for example, and the third party that develop apps for Droid and Apple, they know that, and experience is a key here. So one slide that's a little more technical maybe, it's, how do you support it at a very high level? And again, just showing the components of a modern data platform and how can you modernize your current environment to have components that can better support what we're talking about today. So what you see here is your traditional deployment, traditional platform to support either BI or, to deliver information. So you got your corporate data, many different data sources. You may have an ETL or some kind of ways to load the data into a centralized repository. It's governed, hopefully, and then you have access to that through BI platforms. And typically what this allows you to do is report distribution, ad hoc reporting, which is kind of the old self-service term, and then budgeting and planning. And dashboard to some extent, but typically they will be static or not too interactive. Then what we've seen many of our clients, in most of our projects, we added something we like to call the analytics store. It's just a way to compile the data into a much more summarized and aggregated way, so that some of those large data into small summaries, use cases can be provided with a technology that can put it either in memory or into a columnar database. If you heard of all those there's a lot of new technologies out there and vendors that are supporting self-service with the columnar approach. IBM, for example, has one, and there's many vendors in the marketplace. That's a key element, I think, in rolling out and enabling self-service to some degree. Of course, cubes, analytics cubes, have been kind of the traditional way to do that, but it's still not, it's scalable enough typically to really please all the different use cases. We've seen cubes being able to support one use case, for example, or maybe it's a couple or one department, but rarely we've seen those being able to support the entire organization. So you probably need to upgrade to some newer technology, and we'd love to help you assess, take a look at that. And that will allow you to build, dashboard with good, predictive response time, visualization, etc. Now, it's a new world out there as far as data is concerned. There are big data everywhere. I mean, big data to me is not just unstructured data. It is a big part of it, of course, but it's just a lot of data. And it's also data that is not provided or captured in a way to really be able to browse through that data quickly and create queries and do some good analysis. So that data comes in. Typically, the technology to bring it in is somewhat different, such as streaming, because streaming is a really fast way to move the data into such repository. And this is where Hadoop gets introduced. I think my perspective is Hadoop has had a hard time getting consumed and getting to really impact. I mean, it impacts IT positively by storing very quick data with very low maintenance, but and lots of it. But I think the consumer is still waiting for the silver bullet where they can access that data. Now there are vendors, and that's what the arrows here, the arrow at the bottom here, big data access. There are some good platform technology that allows you to make the Hadoop data consumable. But what I see now Hadoop as being a very good component to make sure your data warehouse on top, only stores what you really need in there. So you can put historical information in Hadoop. The term is called data warehouse offloading. But also with the right vendor to allow access, you can really give self-service users access to unstructured and more complex or large data sets. Now, once you have those in place, you enable a new flavor of self-service, much more analytics-driven. And also, it also introduced a self-service data preparation. That's kind of a new trend. Of course, you've seen some of those vendors out there, and I'll talk about it in a slide or two. But users now with much more analytics use cases and exploration use cases, they want to be also able to not only capture the data, but to prepare the data the way they need it. You know, remember Excel? Remember Access? Same thing, all right? But much more advanced and much more embedded and integrated with the newer algorithms and new visualization and, you know, kind of the way you actually look at some of that new modern data. So this leads to users creating their own silos. They see that little database at the bottom, so their own local or desktop. It could be on a server too, but it's still a use case driven database, we can call it. And what we recommend is we have IT still govern those data assets and see if it makes sense to bring it back into the warehouse, as you saw in this quick animation that took me a week to figure out how to do. But anyway, being able to bring that single database or whatever use case driven database those power users are created back into the governed data warehouse for broad access, if it makes sense. So that's kind of my view of the modern data platform. I use that slide all the time, even to business users, to really help them understand what's involved, what could be required, and how far they are from delivering modern analytics. Use case examples. Not every use case is self-service. I mean, you know, some use cases are still more traditional and still need some static, locked-in-time type of reporting and analytics. So I just brought in here a few use cases that I've seen that I've been involved in where self-service was a key requirement, and some of them that was not as much, and some of them that they thought self-service was a key requirement, but we moved it down, or vice versa, because of you know, just basically how the data present, how it's consumed, and how is the data meaningful to the end user? Does he or she really need to self-serve himself, or is it better off to create something more static and have them access it whatever they wanted? So there's just an example of a few use cases I personally have been involved with, and where I saw value into putting more focus into self-service. Data preparation becoming a hot trend. You know, it has its challenges as well, but it allows users to pretty much do their own prep against the data. Almost every vendor have some offerings. IBM has an offering called Watson Data Connect. It used to be called DataWorks. Actually, Cognos Analytics, I'm sure a lot of those users here on this webinar are users of Cognos. The latest release has a data module, more of a self-service data preparation tool as well, to help more of a business user create you know, a data flow and then store it in a format that they can use. But there are some vendors that have been totally investing in that space, like such as Alteryx and Paxata, and I'm sure there's a few more. But the goal here is to tell you that this is out there. It's better than Excel. I mean, you know, if your users are preparing data in Excel and Access, then the problem is it's not really enterprise and it sits on their desktop. In this case here, you can export whatever you prepare to a database, including the data warehouse, of course. So UX, I don't think, like I said, we don't focus enough on the user interface. Which ATM would you swipe your card in there at the bottom? It is so important. I usually start every analytics project by challenging, okay, what's the UX is going to be, and give them examples and paint pictures, Photoshop, I don't care, but show them what this could look like and get some buy-in at least, or input and feedback on the interface and look and feel. This is so important. Don't wait till the end, because typically if you wait till the end, what you do is you make the interface fit on how the data is presented, and that's a trap itself, because you may have some challenges. So you want to do it the other way around. Talk about the user experience, and then the flow, the interface, and then bring the data to make sure it supports it well. Governance, trusting the data, that's probably the biggest challenge of those desktop tools out there, right? How do you trust the data? Especially if the user is also preparing its own set of data, you got another challenge. But this is a survey that comes out every year. I do have a 2017 slide, but this one is still the same numbers. It's funny, most of the users, half the users don't really trust the data if you really ask them, and a lot of them are blaming IT for the issue. So that's kind of a dilemma that we can't get out of. But bottom line, if your users are dumping their data into Excel, even from a fancy dashboard, I've seen very large projects, expensive project from a resource and cost perspective, and when you look at what the users finally does, they dump it into Excel, and it's heartbreaking. But sometimes it's simply because the data is not presented the way they want it, or they just don't trust it. So they need an extra layer of validation, which they have control of in Excel, for example, to do it. So self-service as a methodology, there's not going to be a one-size-fits-all for that either. So be careful of, just don't think about the tool that you have, basically. Just think about the use case and try to pick a solution architecture that will best fit those different use cases. So, the 80-20 rule is usually the case. The approach that we propose to use, determine the model scope. If you've got exceptions or some use case for self-service that are outliers, well, keep them as outliers as long as they fit into some kind of 20% range. And you're going to please most of the users and then slowly adapt the other set of users to maybe either make concession, or maybe you'll be able to do a micro, deployment of what they need to do. So, there's a big difference between a requirement and a use case, by the way. A requirement is just somebody's going to tell you what they need. I need this, 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 this. And the trap there is you're going to build a foundation that only delivers this in this format, but you're still maybe missing what they're going to do with the data. If somebody tells you what they want to do with the data up front, then it's a lot easier, because then you can reverse engineer that. And you guys know, if there are some more technical audience in the room, that's the approach, the challenge to get the attention sometimes the business user to really understand. So quickly, just to show you, we have a process. We start with business understanding, and then we architect and we develop. We get feedback, and I think what's important, the iterations here between the interface, the experience, get feedback, and keep going until you find the right supportive set of assets to support more self-service and more adoption. The dashboard. Dashboards, is a key. Most of the analytics deployment we see, there are dashboards out there, even some reports that look like dashboard, and we're still having a hard time creating a great adoption. And what I've seen is a lot of those dashboards are just not smart, and I'm just exaggerating here, but basically it means that they don't mean much to the end user at the end of the day, and they leave the interpretation of the dashboard to the consumer or the requester, which I think is not, if you want to create adoption and engagement, you want to also engage the users and, hey, maybe you should look at this, for example, or here's what this could impact. And we'll show you an example, live example at the end of this webcast. My colleague Trevor is going to demonstrate that. But most executives, they do want insight. Of course, they do want prescription and prediction, but they just don't trust the data. So they ask for numbers instead, and they make their own interpretation. That's a trap right there that I've seen into your typical data provider or dashboard provider and consumer. So you want to be able to, crack that code and take a different approach to it, and really make sure that you sit down with those consumers and understand what they're looking for, not from a data perspective, but from an insight and use case perspective. A lot of those dashboard / data provider, they're collecting. They don't have that tribal knowledge, and it's not it's just the nature of the beast. Basically, typically they're not the ones that have been in the organization long enough to really understand some of the impactful metrics that really could bring bottom line decision making. So I think this is just normal, and when you're in those shoes, what you do is you tend to just give the users a data overdose. So you know what, I don't want to miss the boat, so I'm going to give you a lot of data so that you can, there's a good chance that you're going to have what you need there. And finally, the designer visualization. I've seen dashboard, and the goal today is not to show you ugly dashboards and the best practice of building dashboard. We could do another webcast on that, but so many of those visualizations or dashboards are just a gallery of charts, and it gets so confusing, and it's hard to create interrelation between those widgets per se. So it distracts the audience. It may look good at first, but then when you really see how they consume it, this is where you realize that you may have given a data overload. What is a smart dashboard? So one of the techniques that, and by the way, the reason I'm focusing on dashboard now, because we do believe it's a key element in creating self-service and adoption. So, and we'll explain why shortly, and we'll demonstrate it as well. But when you look in the trenches, if you want to bring the dashboard down to the operational managers, right? Of course, executives, they want dashboards, and we've delivered them for many years already. But when you want to really impact the bottom line, you want to give you want to give impactful insight to the folks who are leading operation and making decisions at the operational level. And one approach to take, I think, when you want to design a dashboard is think back on how those operational managers, what's their day in the life, right? They usually interface with applications that are more workflow-oriented, automated. There's actions, usually, ERPs and such things, very role-based, based on who you log in. It's as real-time as possible, and it's typically, connecting to a single source. If you look at the other extreme on the right, analysis and exploration, well, those guys are using they're looking for ad hoc and something that's very self-service. Historical information is important as opposed to just real-time, and multiple sources usually. So you're trying to merge this into, if you merge this into the dashboard and how you build your dashboard and the approach you take, you could end up with something very impactful. And not everything is possible. It depends on the use case, the data, and the technology, that you guys are using. But I do believe that those keywords that I see here are, if you can address most of them, then you're getting closer to a very impactful and engaging dashboard and create adoption on the way as well. So I like to call them smart operational dashboard. And it's funny how we look at a lot of our clients, we go back and say, hey, give us the challenge to convert your dashboard into a much more operational, more engaging ones. And sometimes it doesn't require a lot of modification and upgrade. So I'm not going to read all this, but those, again, just a summary. You want to make sure this dashboard has alerts to pay attention to stuff. You want to make sure that there are operational metrics, not just always strategic and high-level strategic goals. You want to back it up with operational metrics if you can. If there's enough real estate, also, of course, that's always a potential challenge. But also, want to recommend some actions as well. And sometimes it's just as simple as, hey, based on what we know, this is the type of action that you should be taking. And it could be just freestyle text, taken from a common database, or it could be something that users can help you input into a lookup database, so that you can, you don't have to bring data science to the solution, but of course, data science or AI would be the best way to have a very to the point and relevant recommended action. Storytelling. So that's kind of a new feature you see in most of the vendors that have, the main vendors in the BI and analytics space. They bring storytelling, and I've yet to see clients that are really using it, I think, the right way. And I'm being bold here, but I think storytelling is probably the best way to engage a dashboard audience to start using that dashboard. Because with storytelling, you kind of set the stage to make sure the users are interpreting the right interpretation of the data and the insights through visualization. It's a lot easier to remember how to consume a dashboard if you bring in more of a PowerPoint or more of a a slideshow of how to read it. We'll give you a nice demonstration of that. But I've seen storytelling as a great way to set the stage for self-service and for dashboarding. So if you look at the evolution of a self-service organization, well, of course, it starts with scheduled report, with parameterized report. You have parameters that are added to reports to help users pick and choose and slice what they want to see in their data. So that's one way to do self-service, but it's kind of the way we used to do it traditionally. Then ad hoc reporting comes into play. Storytelling, guided insights is where I think you can really engage your audience to use that dashboard that you have that you want to deploy. And so I think we'd like to see our customers. If you don't have a storytelling technology in your BI platform, that's okay. I've seen PowerPoint guides to help with screenshots to help users better consume and connect with the dashboard. So that's kind of the roadmap to self-service analytics, and we definitely would like to help you get there. We have a couple of offerings that I've been leading in the past couple of years that can help you get there. Whether it's more data focused, we can help you modernize your data platform by assessing it and then provide recommendation and prototype some of that technology if you don't have it, which will allow you to really achieve as much as possible of the benefits that I highlighted in this slide. And also, we do have a workshop for self-service where, based on the use case, we can really help you assess how much of self-service have you already delivered, how much you can deliver, and then we prototype with with a user group, a pilot user group. We prototype the approach and techniques and methodology that we suggest, and then we hope to give you guys enough knowledge transfer to do it on your own. So that's been very effective. I've seen it short, I've seen it longer, depends on, of course, how deep the use case is and how broad it is, but a great way to have a third party bring another set of eyes into what you're doing and help you with some creative ideas, deliver self-service. So please reach out to me or to eCapital if you have any, if you think this would be something that you'd like us to partner with you guys for. So with that, I will now give you enough PowerPoint. I'm going to pass it to Trevor, which will introduce himself and give you a great presentation supporting what we talked about. Thanks. Trevor?
Yep. Thanks, Francois. Hi, my name is Trevor Schulte with eCapital Advisors. I'm a senior business intelligence consultant doing BI and BA type activities for probably the past 10 years. And what I want to show you today is both stories and dashboard. As Francois mentioned, a lot of the new BI tools integrate some sort of storytelling. A great quote I once heard said, stories is just data with a soul. And that's what we want to do with the stories. We want to bring life to data. So a couple of ways we do that is how we actually go about depicting data. So I'm going to open up my story here, and I'm going to hit play. And we're going to see a depiction of a trend. Now, typically we use a line chart to depict trend, but it leaves the user guessing as to why were there low points. What are you trying to tell me with this? The conclusion ultimately is left to the end user to determine what I want to glean from this information. We can better depict that trend by using kind of like a KPI, where we give them a clearly defined starting point. We provide trend with the direction of the KPI, as well as we can express intensity or excitement through the size font we use or the position on the screen. Again, bringing life to that data rather than just giving them that standard line chart. In the next example I'll show you here, this is a typical bubble chart where we've got 3 measurable values and we need to somehow call out what we need to look at. Traditionally, what we would do is we'd change colors, we'd provide some labeling on a chart, we'd identify different sectors of data, we'd try and have fly-ins that tell us we want to identify this particular value. Well, that screen gets awfully busy when we start trying to go down to a very fixed point. But with the new tools, we can actually drill into data. So now I'm not just calling out a quadrant, I'm drilling into that quadrant. I'm filtering just to a specific value, and I'm describing what needs to be done. And as Francois said, the most important point is give them a direction to take. Give them contact information if contacting that customer is what we want to do. So finally, Francois said, use stories as a way to introduce dashboards. So I'll show you a dashboard that has to do with returns, but what we're showing you here is these are the metrics that are going to be on that dashboard. I want users to select the top 10 returned products and see what is the propensity of that product to be returned. Where is it coming from? I can also select a different product on the list on the left side, and it will change my dashboard, so now I can investigate a second product. This is how we want someone to use a dashboard. So I'm going to exit out of my story here, and I'm going to go to a dashboard example. I'm going to start by showing you, I'm sure most of us who have tried to create dashboards have done something like this. We've provided an engaging background. We used a lot of color to draw eye. But what we end up doing is causing our own noise, causing our own degradation of the data. Charts are too small, there are too many values to consume, the visualization we might have chosen does not best depict what we're trying to tell. Some charts have too much information going out to the decimal. Some don't have enough because there's no title in there. I'm going to go to the returns dashboard where we provide those key values. What time frame are we looking at? What does the KPI represent? Color defines bad or unfavorable situations. So in this dashboard that we just saw a story on, I have that same list, and I can select the first option. It filters my entire dashboard, and I can now see that, okay, this product tends to be an incomplete product. And not only have we taken that data from its data warehouse, we've also fed it through a prescriptor software that tells us, okay, well, if it's going to be an incomplete product or an unsatisfactory product, we might have a quality control problem in BOM. So we might want to investigate that. We also might want to increase the quality control in our packaging. If I select a different product, say the cooler here, the second option, we see that, oh, these are being returned for a completely different set of reasons. This seems to be the wrong product was ordered, a defective product, or a wrongly shipped product. But the interesting part is it tends to just come from a particular region. So sending this through a predictor, I no longer need to focus on quality control. I need to start looking at the product description might be wrong, causing people to order the wrong product. Or talking to a very specific regional manager about how they're dealing with orders and shipments. The dashboard now becomes a way for an end user to take quick action on potential situations and change the way they go about doing their daily work rather than relying on their knowledge or their tribal knowledge of how their day should be used and what this data means to them. So that was just a quick example of how we would use a story, how we can better use visualizations to tell our story, and how we can use stories to introduce dashboards and build effective dashboards for our end users. With that, I'll turn it over to Francois.
Yeah, thanks, Trevor. So we're going to pause a little bit, see if there's any question. You can use the chat window, or you can, I guess that's the only way here. So if you have any questions, please just use chat and send it to me or Trevor or to the host. So we're going to just pause a few seconds, see if anybody has any question. typically not a lot of questions following our webinar, so you know, we recorded this and we're going to be distributing the recording to you guys. As you know, this is part of a series that we are presenting monthly, I believe. I believe the next one is July 18th, which will be financial and operation planning. You can look on our website. I'm sure you're part of the distribution list for registering to that next event. So I don't see any questions. So please, you know how to reach us through the web page or to the registration page. I'm François Ross, and with Trevor, we thank you for your time and investment in this 1 hour, 45-minute session. Oh, sorry, heard a noise. Is there a question?
Yep, we have one question. Any thoughts on using IBCS, International Business Communication Standards?
Well, that's not sure exactly the context of it. I'm not that familiar with that standard either, but if the question is regarding any thought of using some kind of standard for compliance on how you communicate metrics and data, then yeah, I'm sure it can be used, but I'd like to have more context into being able to answer that question.
Yeah, and this is in context of dashboards. I think a good thought on that is we'll try and address that in some follow-up content, and then we'll distribute that out. That way we can, Francois and I can put our thoughts together on that.
Oh, okay. Thanks, Trevor.
I don't see any other questions coming in.
Okay, well, thank you all, and again, we'll talk to you next month, and looking forward to hear back from you guys and hopefully work with some of you. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Bye-bye.